your kid told you they lost $20, you'd ask questions. If your bank told you they misplaced $2,000, you'd close the account. So what do when the government can't account for 2.5 trillion? That's not a typo. That's not rounding error. That's not waste. That is money the Pentagon cannot fully track after failing audits 8 years in a row. Now here's the question that turns this from a headline into a courtroom. If waste, fraud, and abuse justify shutting down an agency, why wasn't the Pentagon even on the table? This is not a normal hearing. This is a logical trap set in real time and walked into on camera. When Jared Moskowitz starts asking questions, he doesn't accuse. He builds a chain. Waste exists in government? Yes. In the Pentagon? Yes. In the Department of Homeland Security? Yes. And then comes the line that quietly changes everything. If every agency has waste, why was USAID eliminated overnight? No raised voices, no grandstanding, just silence. Where an answer should be. And the silence matters more than the answer. Because right before that silence, the witness had already agreed to every single premise. Yes, there is waste in the Pentagon. Yes, there is waste in the Department of Homeland Security. Yes, there is waste across government, so logically, by their own standard, every agency should be at risk. But that's not what happened. Instead, the focus lands entirely on USAID, an agency that funds food programs, disease prevention, and international stabilization. And within 72 hours, it's gone. Justified under the banner of waste, fraud, and abuse. Now listen carefully to what was said and what wasn't. No one said the Pentagon should be dismantled after 8 failed audits. No one proposed shutting down DHS after a $200 million advertising campaign that rivals major Hollywood productions. No one argued that a single instance of misuse should erase an entire institution. But when it came to USAID, that exact logic suddenly applied. That's not policy consistency, that's selective reasoning. And this is where the exchange becomes more than a hearing. It becomes a record of contradiction. Because Jared Moskowitz doesn't interrupt. He doesn't escalate. He just holds the logic in place long enough for it to collapse under its own weight. And when he asks the final question, whether eliminating one agency while excusing others makes sense, there's no rebuttal. Not because the data is missing, but because the logic doesn't hold. And this is where the tone shifts. Because once the logic is on record, the only thing left is the evidence. The Pentagon has failed its audit not once, not twice, but 8 consecutive years. Not partially failed to fully account for its assets. According to publicly available audit summaries and Inspector General reporting, trillions in assets cannot be fully reconciled across its systems. Let that sit for a second. 8 years. Trillions unaccounted for in documentation trails. And still, no emergency shutdown, no overnight dismantling, no sweeping declaration that the entire institution must be eliminated. Now contrast that with what happened to USAID. One narrative, waste, fraud, abuse. One decision, terminate the agency structure in under 72 hours. That's not a gradual reform process. That's not targeted oversight. That's a full stop. So let's stack the receipts. A Department of Defense audit cycle, annual, required by law, repeatedly failing to meet full accountability standards. A Department of Homeland Security expenditure, approximately $200 million on advertising, publicly reported, debated, but operationally unchanged. And a global aid agency eliminated entirely under the justification that inefficiencies exist. Same premise, 3 different outcomes. Now here's the prosecutorial question. What changed? Because the variable is not waste. The variable is not fraud. The variable is not even scale. Because by scale alone, the Pentagon would be the first under scrutiny. The variable is discretion. Who gets reformed? Who gets ignored? And who gets erased? When Jared Moskowitz walks the witness through this sequence, he's not presenting new data. He's aligning existing facts into a single line of reasoning and forcing that reasoning to be answered consistently. And it isn't. Because if waste justifies elimination, then elimination should be universal. If elimination is not universal, then waste is not the real standard being applied. That's the contradiction. And contradictions in a hearing like this don't just expose gaps in policy, they expose gaps in intent. Now take it one step further. When oversight responsibility for foreign assistance shifts toward the United States Department of State, the witness acknowledges something critical. Without sufficient staffing, monitoring, and inspector general capacity, the same risks, fraud, diversion, abuse, will follow the money wherever it goes, meaning the problem doesn't disappear, but it migrates. So eliminating an agency doesn't eliminate risk. It redistributes antisemitic, often into systems less prepared to track it, and that leads to the deeper implication. If the stated goal is accountable ascendability, but the chosen action reduces oversight capacity, then the outcome contradicts the objective, not in theory, in structure. And that's where this stops being about one agency and starts becoming a question about how accountability is actually defined. And this is where it stops being abstract and becomes human. Because 2.5 trillion is not just a number on a balance sheet. It is cancer treatment someone never gets. It is student debt that never gets forgiven. It is meals that never reach seniors who are already choosing between food and medication. That's what makes the contrast impossible to ignore. On one side, an institution like the Pentagon continues operating after years of unresolved accounting gaps, debated, acknowledged, but ultimately absorbed into the system. On the other, USAID, an agency tied to food aid, disease prevention, and global stability, is removed almost overnight under the same language: waste, fraud, abuse. So this is no longer about partisan lines. This is about whether the standard is real or selectively applied. Because if accountability only appears where it's politically convenient, then it's not accountability. It's leverage, and if the rules change depending on who's being evaluated, then the system is not enforcing law, it's negotiating it. So here's the question that this hearing leaves behind, one that no one in that room fully answered. If trillions can't be fully accounted for and the system continues unchanged, but smaller, targeted inefficiencies can justify eliminating an entire agency, then what is the real threshold for accountability, and who decides when it applies? If moments like this matter to you, hit like, share your perspective in the comments, and subscribe, because this isn't noise. This is yours. Waar is the record?